When Clint Eastwood returned to the Western genre after a 9-year hiatus, he created more than just a film. He crafted a supernatural mystery that blurred the lines between life and death. Behind the scenes, horses collapsed under massive actors, train sets burned down in wildfires, son Scott Eastwood was conceived on premiere night, and the trailer music became forever linked to British television news. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Pale Rider. Fact 1. The first horse collapsed, under Richard Kiel. When the production team of Pale Rider cast Richard Kiel as the intimidating enforcer named Club, they knew they were getting one of Hollywood's most physically imposing actors. Standing 7 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 328 pounds, Kiel was already famous for playing the steel-toothed villain Jaws in 2 James Bond films, The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. His massive frame made him perfect for playing a menacing heavy in Clint Eastwood's Western, but it also created an unexpected problem that became one of the film's most memorable behind-the-scenes moments. During the scene where the preacher helps Club back onto his horse after their confrontation, the production crew assigned Kiel what they thought was a sturdy mount. However, when the massive actor attempted to climb aboard for the first take, the horse literally collapsed under his weight. The poor animal simply couldn't handle supporting Kiel's enormous bulk, creating an embarrassing and potentially dangerous situation on set. The collapse happened so suddenly that it caught everyone off guard, and filming had to be stopped immediately while the crew figured out what to do next. The production team quickly realized they needed a much stronger horse to handle Kiel's size, so they brought in a more powerful animal capable of supporting his weight. Even with the stronger horse, the crew had to install a special mounting step beside the animal to help Kiel get into the saddle safely. If you watch the final film carefully, you can actually see this step in the shot where the preacher helps Club back onto his horse. The step was necessary not just because of Kiel's weight, but also because he was suffering from back problems during filming, which made mounting a horse even more challenging for the aging actor. This practical solution allowed them to complete the scene while keeping both Kiel and the horse safe during production. Fact 2. Scott Eastwood was conceived on premiere night. According to Hollywood Insider stories that have circulated for decades, one of the most significant moments in Clint Eastwood's personal life happened on the same night he was celebrating his return to the Western genre. On the evening of Pale Rider's West Coast premiere at the Golden Bough Theater in Carmel, California, Eastwood reportedly had a romantic encounter with a flight attendant named Jaslyn Reeves that would change both of their lives forever. The timing of this meeting, whether by coincidence or fate, would become part of Hollywood lore when the math was worked out months later. Jaslyn Reeves was working as a flight attendant when she crossed paths with the legendary actor and director. While the exact details of how they met that evening remain private, what happened next became clear when Reeves discovered she was pregnant approximately 9 months after the premiere celebration. The child born from this encounter was Scott Reeves, who would later change his last name to Scott Eastwood and follow in his father's footsteps to become an actor himself. This story has become one of those fascinating pieces of Hollywood trivia that connects a major film premiere to the birth of the next generation of movie stars. Scott Eastwood, who was born in 1986, didn't initially use his famous father's surname, going by Scott Reeves for the early part of his life. It wasn't until he decided to pursue acting seriously that he adopted the Eastwood name, which instantly connected him to his father's legendary career. The relationship between Clint Eastwood and Jaslyn Reeves continued for several years after that premiere night, and they had another child together, a daughter named Catherine, born in 1988. However, the couple never married, and their relationship eventually ended. Scott Eastwood has since appeared in numerous films and has openly discussed his famous father's influence on his career, making that premiere night encounter one of the most consequential evenings in recent Hollywood history. Fact 3. The trailer music became Channel 4 News theme. One of the most unusual connections between a Hollywood Western and British television news involves a piece of music that millions of people hear every day without knowing its cinematic origins. The dramatic, sweeping musical theme used in the trailers for Pale Rider was a composition called Best Endeavours by British composer Alan Hawkshaw. But this same piece of music had already been serving as the opening theme for Channel 4 News in Britain since 1982, 3 years before Eastwood's film even hit theaters. Alan Hawkshaw originally created Best Endeavours as part of a corporate music library, meaning it was available for anyone to license and use in their productions. The piece wasn't specifically commissioned for Channel 4 News, but when the head of music at Channel 4 heard it, they thought it had the perfect combination of authority and excitement needed for a news program. What made this situation particularly interesting was that Channel 4 never secured exclusive rights to the music, which meant other productions could use it as well. When the marketing team for Pale Rider was putting together their promotional materials, they discovered Best Endeavors in the music library and felt its dramatic, almost Western-style fanfare was perfect for advertising Eastwood's return to the genre. Hawkshaw himself later noted that the composition had an almost Western theme to it, an Elmer Bernstein feel, which explains why it worked so well for both purposes. The result was that British audiences who watched the Pale Rider trailers experienced a strange moment of recognition, hearing their familiar news theme playing over scenes of gunfights and horseback chases. This dual use created an amusing cultural crossover, where the same piece of music became associated with both serious journalism and Hollywood entertainment. For British viewers, Best Endeavors is far more recognizable as the Channel 4 news theme than as music from a Clint Eastwood Western, since they hear it multiple times every day during news broadcasts, while the film trailers only aired for a few months during the movie's original release. Fact 4. Eastwood's worst on-set injury ever. Despite decades of performing his own stunts in countless action films and westerns, Clint Eastwood experienced what he would later describe as the worst injury of his entire career while filming Pale Rider in the mountains of Idaho during the winter of 1984. The accident happened during what should have been a routine horseback riding scene, but the harsh winter conditions in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area created a dangerous situation that nobody on the production team had anticipated. Eastwood was riding his horse across what appeared to be solid ground when the animal suddenly broke through a layer of thin ice that had formed over a water source. The ice gave way so quickly that neither Eastwood nor the horse had any warning, and the sudden collapse sent both of them tumbling in different directions. As the horse fell through the ice and struggled to regain its footing, the violent motion launched Eastwood forward with tremendous force, sending him flying from the saddle and crashing hard onto the frozen ground. The impact was severe enough to dislocate Eastwood's shoulder, an injury that caused him significant pain and required immediate medical attention. In interviews years later, Eastwood would reflect on this accident as being far worse than any of the bumps, bruises, and minor injuries he had sustained during his many years of doing physical scenes in movies. The shoulder dislocation was particularly problematic because it affected his ability to continue filming certain scenes that required him to use both arms normally. What made this injury even more remarkable was that Eastwood was 54 years old at the time, an age when most actors would have started using stunt doubles for dangerous scenes. However, Eastwood had always prided himself on doing his own riding and action sequences, believing it added authenticity to his performances. The accident with the thin ice served as a harsh reminder of how quickly things could go wrong during film production, even for an experienced horseman like Eastwood, who had been riding in movies for over 2 decades. Fact 5. The bullet scars match Stockburn's death. One of the most chilling and carefully planned details in Pale Rider involves a visual connection that most viewers miss on their first viewing, but once noticed, adds a haunting layer to the film's supernatural mystery. Early in the movie, there's a brief scene where the preacher is getting dressed, and the camera reveals 6 distinct bullet wound scars across his back, arranged in a very specific pattern that looks like the result of a violent gunfight from his past. These scars become incredibly significant when you reach the film's climactic shootout between the preacher and Marshal Stockburn, the corrupt lawman played by veteran Western actor John Russell. During this final confrontation, the preacher shoots Stockburn 6 times in the chest, and when Stockburn falls forward, the camera shows 6 exit wounds in his back. The positioning and spacing of these 6 exit wounds are arranged in exactly the same pattern as the 6 bullet scars that were visible on the preacher's back earlier in the film. This matching detail suggests a deeply disturbing backstory that the film never explicitly explains but strongly implies through this visual storytelling. The identical wound patterns indicate that Marshal Stockburn was likely the person who killed the preacher in the past, shooting him 6 times in the back in what must have been a brutal execution or ambush. When Stockburn recognizes the preacher during their final confrontation and expresses shock at seeing him alive, it supports the theory that he believed he had already killed this man. The fact that the preacher returns to kill Stockburn with the exact same number of shots, creating the identical wound pattern, suggests a supernatural form of justice or revenge from beyond the grave. This careful attention to detail by Eastwood and his production team creates one of the most subtle but powerful pieces of visual storytelling in the film, reinforcing the mysterious and possibly ghostly nature of the preacher's character without ever having to state it directly through dialogue or exposition. Fact 6. Eastwood confirmed his character was a ghost. While Clint Eastwood has always been known for creating mysterious characters and leaving audiences to interpret their true nature, he made a rare exception when it came to explaining the supernatural elements of Pale Rider. In audio interviews recorded after the film's release, Eastwood definitively settled years of fan speculation by clearly stating that his character Preacher is an out-and-out ghost, removing any ambiguity about the character's otherworldly status. This direct confirmation was unusual for Eastwood, who typically preferred to let viewers draw their own conclusions about his enigmatic characters. Throughout his career in westerns, especially in films like High Plains Drifter and the Man with No Name trilogy, Eastwood had cultivated a reputation for playing mysterious figures whose backgrounds and true identities remain deliberately vague. Directors and actors often avoid explaining supernatural elements in their films, preferring to maintain the mystery and allow different interpretations to coexist. Eastwood's willingness to explicitly confirm the ghostly nature of the Preacher helped explain many of the strange elements that viewers noticed throughout the film. The character's sudden appearances and disappearances, his seemingly magical ability to avoid being shot during gunfights, and his mysterious knowledge of people and events from the past all made more sense once audiences understood they were watching a supernatural being rather than just an unusually skilled gunfighter. The confirmation also shed light on the film's deeper themes about justice, revenge, and redemption from beyond the grave. By acknowledging that the Preacher was indeed a spirit returned from the dead, Eastwood validated the interpretation that the entire story was about supernatural justice being served against those who had committed terrible crimes in the past. This rare moment of directorial clarity helped establish Pale Rider as one of the few mainstream Hollywood westerns to openly embrace supernatural storytelling rather than simply hinting at it through symbolism and suggestion. Fact 7. Train set burned down after Back to the Future 3. The train station set that was specially constructed for Pale Rider had a fascinating second life in Hollywood that created an ironic connection between Clint Eastwood and one of the most beloved science fiction comedies of all time. After filming wrapped on Pale Rider in 1984, the elaborate Western train station set was left standing at its location south of Jamestown, California, where it caught the attention of other filmmakers looking for authentic period locations. 5 years later, Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis chose this same train station set as a key location for Back to the Future Part 3, the Western-themed conclusion to their time-traveling trilogy. The irony became even more pronounced when the script called for Michael J. Fox's character Marty McFly to adopt a fake identity in the Old West, and he chose the name Clint Eastwood as his alias, directly referencing the very actor whose film had originally created the set they were now using. The train station served both productions well, providing an authentic 19th-century atmosphere that helped transport audiences back to the days of the American frontier. The set had been built with careful attention to historical detail, making it valuable for any Western production that needed a realistic period train depot. After Back to the Future Part 3 finished filming in 1989, the set remained standing for several more years, becoming part of the landscape in the California foothills. However, this piece of movie history met a tragic end on August 12, 1996, when a massive wildfire swept through the area. The flames completely destroyed the train station set along with 26 other buildings that had been part of various movie productions over the years. The fire also consumed between $10,000 and $15,000 worth of movie props and equipment that had been stored at the location. This devastating loss eliminated a unique piece of cinematic heritage that had served as the backdrop for two very different but equally memorable films. Fact 8. The film broke Heaven's Gate curse. When Pale Rider arrived in theaters in June of 1985, it accomplished something that many industry experts thought might never happen again by becoming the first major Hollywood Western to achieve both critical acclaim and commercial success in over 5 years. The Western genre had been effectively dead in Hollywood since the catastrophic release of Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate in 1980, a film that had become synonymous with everything that could go wrong in movie production. Heaven's Gate was originally budgeted at $7.5 million, but spiraled completely out of control during production, eventually costing over $40 million and taking nearly 4 years to complete. The film was such a massive commercial and critical disaster that it single-handedly bankrupted United Artists, one of Hollywood's most respected studios, and created a widespread fear among executives about investing in Western films. The failure was so complete and so public that it essentially poisoned the entire genre in the eyes of studio decision-makers. For 5 long years after Heaven's Gate, Hollywood avoided Western projects like they carried some kind of curse, with major studios refusing to greenlight any films set in the Old West regardless of the talent involved or the quality of the scripts. The genre that had once been a reliable source of entertainment and profit suddenly became untouchable, leaving Western fans with nothing but reruns of classic films from earlier decades. Pale Rider changed everything by proving that audiences still had an appetite for well-made Western entertainment when it was delivered by the right filmmaker. Eastwood's film earned over $41 million at the box office against a modest budget of just under $7 million, making it not only profitable but the highest-grossing Western of the entire 1980s. This success opened the door for other filmmakers to return to the genre, eventually leading to acclaimed Westerns like Unforgiven, Tombstone, and Dances with Wolves in the following decade. Fact 9. Dolph Lundgren made an unofficial remake. 22 years after Pale Rider's release, action star Dolph Lundgren created what many consider to be an unofficial modern remake of Eastwood's Western, though he updated the setting and changed horses to motorcycles. In 2007, Lundgren wrote, directed, and starred in a straight-to-DVD film called Missionary Man that follows the basic plot structure of Pale Rider so closely that viewers immediately noticed the similarities between the two films. In Lundgren's version, he plays a mysterious character named Ryder, who rides into a small town on a motorcycle instead of a horse, carrying a Bible and seeking to bring justice to oppressed people. Just like Eastwood's preacher, Ryder is a man of few words with a violent past who becomes the protector of a community being terrorized by a corrupt businessman and his hired thugs. The setting was updated from a 19th-century mining town to a modern Native American reservation, but the core story elements remained virtually identical. The parallels between the two films are so obvious that many reviewers and fans commented on how Missionary Man essentially transplanted Pale Rider's plot into a contemporary setting. Ryder arrives in town for a friend's funeral, just as the preacher appeared after prayers for help, and he quickly becomes involved in the local conflict between the powerless community members and the wealthy antagonist who wants to exploit their land for profit. Even the character dynamics and relationships mirror those found in Eastwood's film. Lundgren's film maintained the mysterious, possibly supernatural elements that made the original so intriguing, leaving questions about Ryder's true nature and background unanswered in the same way that Pale Rider kept the preacher's identity ambiguous. While Missionary Man was made on a much smaller budget and received limited distribution compared to the original, it demonstrated how the basic story structure of Pale Rider could be adapted to different time periods and settings while retaining its essential themes of justice and redemption. Fact 10. Hull's mysterious cast appears and disappears. One of the most glaring continuity errors in Pale Rider involves Michael Moriarty's character, Hull Barrett, and a medical cast that seems to appear and disappear through the magic of film editing rather than any logical medical timeline. The error begins during the scene where Hull is brutally attacked and beaten by LaHood's thugs outside the general store in town, where viewers can clearly see that both of his hands remain completely uninjured throughout the entire assault. After the preacher intervenes and saves Hull from further harm, Hull climbs aboard his wagon to head home. And at this point his hands are still perfectly fine with no visible injuries or bandages of any kind. However, in the very next scene when Hull catches up to the preacher on the road, viewers can suddenly see that he's wearing a white medical cast and finger splint on his left hand, as if he had somehow received professional medical treatment during the few minutes of screen time between scenes. This magical appearance of medical equipment becomes even more puzzling when you consider that the story takes place in a remote mining area during the 1800s, where proper medical facilities would have been extremely rare, and Hull certainly didn't have time to visit a doctor between leaving town and catching up with the preacher on the trail. The cast looks professionally applied, complete with clean white bandaging that would have been difficult to obtain in such a frontier setting. The continuity error becomes even more bizarre in subsequent scenes when the cast completely vanishes without explanation, leaving Hull's hand perfectly normal again, as if the injury and medical treatment had never happened. This disappearing cast has become one of those movie mistakes that sharp-eyed viewers love to point out, representing the kind of editing oversight that can happen when scenes are filmed out of sequence and nobody catches the inconsistency during post-production review. Fact 11. The gold nugget defies physics. During one of the most exciting moments in Pale Rider, the character Spider Conway makes a discovery that should have been physically impossible for him to handle the way the film shows. After the miners redirect their water source and begin working the dried-up creek bed, Spider finds what appears to be an enormous gold nugget buried in the sediment and he casually lifts it up with one hand to show the other prospectors his incredible find. The problem with this scene becomes apparent when you consider the actual weight that a gold nugget of that size would have in real life. Based on the dimensions shown in the film, the nugget that Spider holds so effortlessly would weigh at least 66 pounds if it were made of real gold, making it virtually impossible for any normal person to lift with just one hand, let alone wave it around excitedly as Spider does in the scene. Gold is one of the heaviest metals found in nature, with a density that makes even small pieces surprisingly heavy to anyone who isn't expecting it. Professional miners and gold prospectors know that finding a nugget larger than a few ounces is extremely rare, and anything weighing several pounds would be considered a once-in-a-lifetime discovery that would require both hands and considerable effort to lift safely. The film does offer a partial explanation for this apparent defiance of physics through dialogue from another character who points out that the nugget isn't pure gold but rather aggregate rock, with gold veins running through it. This would indeed make it lighter than solid gold, but even accounting for the mixed composition, a rock formation of that size with significant gold content would still weigh far more than Spider appears to be handling. The prop used in filming was obviously made from lightweight materials to allow the actor to perform the scene safely, but the result created a moment that looks unrealistic to anyone familiar with the actual properties of gold. Fact 12. Fritz Main's 7 film cameo streak. One of the most loyal friendships in Hollywood history played out through a series of brief cameo appearances that spanned multiple decades of Clint Eastwood's filmmaking career. Fritz Main's, who served as Eastwood's regular producing partner and close personal friend, made it a tradition to appear in small, uncredited roles in 7 different Eastwood films, even though he had no professional acting experience or training whatsoever. Main's worked primarily behind the camera as a producer, helping Eastwood manage the business and creative aspects of his film projects, but their friendship led to these playful on-screen appearances that became something of an inside joke between the two men. In Pale Rider, Main's can be spotted playing a stage rider, which was a perfect role for someone who wasn't a professional actor, since it required minimal dialogue and allowed him to blend naturally into the background of the Western setting. The tradition of putting Main's in front of the camera continued throughout multiple Eastwood projects, creating a fun game for dedicated fans who learned to watch for his appearances in each new film. These cameos were never announced or publicized, making them special Easter eggs that only the most observant viewers would notice, and they represented the kind of casual, collaborative atmosphere that Eastwood fostered on his film sets. What made these appearances particularly charming was that Main's was genuinely not an actor and had no aspirations to become one, making his willingness to step in front of the camera a testament to his friendship with Eastwood and his good-natured personality. The roles were always small and undemanding, designed to give Main's a moment of fun without putting pressure on him to deliver any significant dramatic performances. This 7-film streak of cameos became one of those heartwarming Hollywood traditions that showed how personal relationships and genuine friendships could flourish even in the competitive and high-pressure world of major motion picture production. Fact 13. Trees were wrapped in plastic for fake snow. Despite the stunning natural beauty of the Idaho locations where Pale Rider was filmed, some of the forest scenes reveal the creative but budget-conscious methods that the production team used to achieve the winter atmosphere they needed for certain shots. Viewers who pay close attention during the early scenes, particularly during the dog burial sequence, and when the preacher first rides through the woods, can spot several trees that have been wrapped in white plastic sheeting to simulate either snow coverage or the distinctive white bark of birch trees. This kind of practical movie magic was a common technique used by film crews working with limited budgets who needed to create specific visual effects without spending money on expensive digital enhancement or waiting for perfect natural conditions. The plastic wrapping allowed the filmmakers to control exactly how much white coverage appeared on the trees and ensured that the winter look remained consistent across multiple takes and different shooting days, regardless of actual weather conditions. The decision to use this technique likely came from the practical challenges of filming in the mountains during late 1984, when natural snow and weather patterns might not have cooperated with the production schedule. Rather than wait for ideal conditions or spend additional money to return to locations when the snow was perfect, the crew took matters into their own hands by creating the winter atmosphere they needed through these simple but effective visual tricks. While the plastic wrapping is noticeable to sharp-eyed viewers who know what to look for, it doesn't significantly detract from the overall impact of the forest scenes, and most audience members would never notice these details during a normal viewing of the film. The technique demonstrates how creative problem-solving and practical effects work could help independent filmmakers achieve their artistic vision even when working with the relatively modest budget of $6.9 million that Eastwood had available for the entire production. Fact 14. Rawhide episode shared the title by coincidence. In one of those strange coincidences that occasionally happen in Hollywood, Clint Eastwood had already appeared in a production with virtually the same title as his 1985 Western film more than 25 years before he ever conceived of making Pale Rider. During his starring role as Rowdy Yates in the long-running television series Rawhide, which aired throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Eastwood appeared in an episode titled Incident of the Pale Rider that had absolutely no connection to his later theatrical film. Rawhide was the show that first made Eastwood a household name and established his credentials as a Western star, following a group of cattle drivers as they moved herds across the American frontier during the 1860s. Each episode typically featured the word incident in its title, followed by a description of whatever challenge or adventure the characters would face during that particular story, making Incident of the Pale Rider just one of many similarly formatted episode titles throughout the series' 8-year run. The television episode that bore this nearly identical name dealt with completely different characters, plot elements, and themes from the later film, making the shared title nothing more than an interesting footnote in Eastwood's career, rather than any kind of intentional connection or continuation of an earlier story. The writers and producers of the 1985 film were not drawing inspiration from or paying homage to the old television episode when they chose their title. This coincidence becomes even more interesting when you consider that both the television episode and the later film drew their titles from the same biblical source, the Book of Revelation's reference to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, where death rides a pale horse. The fact that Eastwood appeared in 2 separate Western productions with essentially the same religiously inspired title, separated by more than 2 decades, represents one of those quirky career coincidences that entertainment historians love to discover and document. Fact 15. Stockburn's blood-defied clothing logic. During the climactic final shootout between the preacher and Marshal Stockburn, the film's special effects team created a visually dramatic moment that completely ignores the basic physics of how blood would actually behave when someone is shot while wearing multiple layers of heavy clothing. After the preacher shoots Stockburn several times in the chest, the camera shows small rivulets of blood trickling directly out of the bullet holes and running down the exterior surface of Stockburn's long trench coat in perfectly straight lines. This blood flow creates a striking visual effect that emphasizes the finality of Stockburn's defeat, but it makes no sense from a medical or practical standpoint when you consider what the character was actually wearing at the time of the shooting. Stockburn was dressed in a heavy trench coat worn over a complete suit, meaning the bullets would have had to pass through multiple layers of thick fabric before reaching his body, and any blood from the wounds would have been absorbed by the inner clothing layers long before it could reach the outer coat. In reality, gunshot wounds produce blood that would soak into clothing from the inside out, starting with whatever garments are closest to the skin and gradually spreading outward as the fabric becomes saturated. The heavy materials of a trench coat and suit would act like sponges, absorbing any blood and preventing it from appearing on the exterior surface in the neat, clean lines shown in the film. The special effects team likely created this effect by running thin tubes of fake blood underneath the outer coat and allowing it to flow out through pre-made holes, creating the dramatic visual they wanted for the scene. While this technique produced the desired cinematic impact and helped emphasize the supernatural nature of the final confrontation, it resulted in a moment that looks completely unrealistic to anyone familiar with how clothing and bodily fluids actually interact in real-world situations.